Commander Vex Noller adjusted his neural implant, the metallic device clicking softly against his skull as he reviewed the intelligence reports for the 1,000th time. The bridge of the hegemony battleship times Eternal Dominion times hummed with activity, dozens of his subordinates working at their stations with the quiet efficiency that had made the Catharan Empire the most feared force in 3 spiral arms. "Sir!" Lieutenant Kelvaster's voice carried that particular tone of barely contained excitement that young officers got when they thought they'd stumbled onto something big. "The human homeworld scans are complete." Vex Noller's mandibles clicked in amusement. Humans, the galaxy's newest addition to civilized space, if you could call their chaotic mess of competing nations and corporations civilized. His people had been watching Earth for exactly 47 standard cycles now, ever since the humans had managed their first faster-than-light transmission. A miracle, really, considering they'd only recently stopped hitting each other with sticks. "Show me," Vex Noller commanded, his 4 eyes focusing on the tactical display that materialized in front of him. The hologram showed Earth in all its pathetic glory. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. Pretty enough, he supposed, if you enjoyed that sort of primitive aesthetic. But what made him laugh, a sound like grinding metal that echoed through the bridge, were the numbers scrolling alongside the image. Population 8 billion, Kelvastor read aloud, his translator struggling with the concept. Military forces. They have over 200 separate military organizations, just on one planet. They're fighting each other more than they're preparing for external threats. Vex Noller's laugh grew louder. Oh, this was rich. The humans weren't just primitive, they were actively self-destructive. Tactical assessment? Senior Analyst Morketh, a veteran of Ablash, 17 conquest campaigns, stood from her station. Her scales shifted to a confident blue-green as she spoke. "Sir, based on our observations, the humans pose no threat whatsoever to the Empire. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and primitive nuclear devices. Their space fleet consists of exactly 12 vessels, none larger than a scout ship. I've seen cargo convoys with better protection." The bridge crew erupted in laughter. Even the usually stoic navigation officer Kel Thorne allowed himself a small chuckle. It was almost too easy. Almost unfair, really. "Sir!" Communications Officer Yex Lander spoke up, her voice cutting through the mirth. "We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. It appears to be diplomatic in nature." "Put it through," Vex Noller said, settling back in his command throne. "This ought to be entertaining." The main view screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human female in some sort of formal attire. She had graying hair and tired eyes, the look of someone who'd been dealing with problems far beyond her comprehension. Behind her, Vex Noller could see what looked like a hastily assembled chamber filled with more humans, all looking equally overwhelmed. "Greetings," the human woman said, her voice steady despite the obvious fear in her expression. "I am Director Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Council. We've detected your ships." Vex Noller gestured for the communication channel to be opened. "Greetings, Director Vasquez. I am Commander Vex Noller of the Catharan Empire. Your species has caught our attention." He could see the human swallow hard. "Good. Fear was always a useful starting point in these conversations. We come in peace," Vasquez continued. "We're prepared to discuss terms of coexistence." "Coexistence?" Vex Noller's mandibles spread wide in what humans commenter might mistake for a smile, if they were particularly naive. "Director, I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a negotiation between equals. This is a surrender demand." The silence that followed was delicious. Vex Noller could see the humans behind Vasquez whispering urgently among themselves, their primitive emotional displays written clearly across their faces. Panic, anger, desperation. All the usual responses from species facing their first contact with superior civilization. What exactly are you demanding? Vasquez finally asked. Simple terms, Vex Noller said, enjoying every word. Complete submission to the Kytharan Empire. Your military forces will be dissolved. Your governments will be replaced with imperial administrators. Your resources will be allocated according to imperial needs. Your people will be integrated into our labor force as appropriate. More whispers from the Human Council. One of them, a male with white hair, leaned forward and whispered something urgently in Vasquez's ear. She listened, nodded, then turned back to the screen. And if we refuse? Vex Noller's laugh could have powered a small mining station. Director, have you seen the size of our fleet? We have over 3,000 ships in this sector alone. Your entire planet could be sterilized in less than 6 hours. This isn't a threat. It's a statement of fact. The human director's composure finally cracked, just a little. He could see her hands shaking as she gripped the podium in front of her. How long do we have to consider your terms? 48 standard hours? Vex Noller said magnanimously. After that, we begin orbital bombardment of your major population centers. I suggest you use the time wisely. He cut the transmission with a gesture, leaving the humans to contemplate their fate. The bridge crew was still chuckling as the view screen returned to its tactical display. Sir, Quelvastor said, shall I begin preparations for the occupation force? Of course, Vex Noller replied. Though I suspect we'll barely need 1/10 of our standard complement. These humans will fold faster than wet cardboard in a supernova. Morketh approached his command throne, her scales now a satisfied golden hue. Sir, if I may, this conquest might set a new record for speed and efficiency. The humans appear even more disorganized than the Veltari were during their capitulation. The Veltari at least had energy weapons, Vex Noller mused. These humans are still throwing metal pellets at each other. It's almost sad, really. The next 36 hours passed exactly as expected. The Kytharan fleet maintained its position at the edge of the Sol system, monitoring human communications with the kind of casual interest one might show while watching insects scurry around after their nest had been kicked. The humans were predictably chaotic. Their communication networks buzzed with panic. Their military forces scrambled around like headless fowl, and their political leaders held emergency session after emergency session that seemed to accomplish nothing except generating more arguments. Sir, Communications Officer Yex Lander reported during the second day, we're intercepting increased military chatter from the human forces. They appear to be mobilizing their fleet. Vex Noller nearly choked on his stimulant drink. Their fleet? All 12 ships? Yes, sir. They're converging on a position approximately halfway between their moon and our advanced scouts. The entire bridge fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter so intense that several junior officers had to steady themselves against their stations. Even the usually professional senior analyst Morketh was holding her sides, her scales flickering between blue and gold in amusement. They're actually going to fight, Quelvastor managed between gasps. 12 ships against 3,000. It's not even mathematically possible for this to be a groof battle, Vex Noller said, wiping moisture from his eyes. It's going to be target practice, with the emphasis on target. He activated the ship's intercom system. Attention, crew of the Eternal Dominion. In approximately 6 hours, we will be conducting live fire exercises against the human resistance force. I expect this to take no longer than 15 minutes. Weapon crews. Please remember to record the engagement for training purposes. Future officers will want to study what happens when a primitive species attempts to fight a modern military. The announcement was met with cheers throughout the ship. Even the maintenance crews in the lower decks were probably laughing themselves senseless. Sir, Navigation Officer Kelthorne spoke up. Should we alert the rest of the fleet? They might want to observe. Excellent idea, Vex Noller agreed. Send word to all ships. We'll make this a fleet-wide demonstration. The humans want to go out fighting? We'll give them a death worth remembering. 4 hours later, the human fleet appeared on long-range sensors. 12 ships, arranged in what appeared to be some sort of battle formation. Vex Noller had to admit they looked surprisingly organized for such a primitive force, but organization wouldn't help when you were this outgunned. Visual contact established, Yexlander reported. The main view screen showed the human fleet in all its pitiful glory. The ships were smaller than Vex Noller had expected, sleek and angular in design, but they looked like toys compared to the massive bulk of Kitharan dreadnoughts. "Sir," Morketh said, studying her tactical readouts, "the human vessels are odd." "Odd? How?" "Their energy signatures are strange, almost like they're running completely silent, except for basic life support and propulsion." Vex Noller waved dismissively, probably trying to hide their weapons systems until the last moment, as if it would matter. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," Yexlander announced. "Let's hear their surrender," Vex Noller said, settling back to enjoy the moment. A woman in a blue uniform faced the camera, her expression calm and professional. She had short brown hair and steady green eyes that showed no trace of the fear Vex Noller expected to see. "This is Admiral Sarah Kane of the Earth Defense Fleet," she said in a clear, strong voice. "You have threatened our world and demanded our surrender. We reject your terms." Vex Noller blinked in surprise. This wasn't the terrified capitulation he'd anticipated. The human actually sounded confident. "Admiral Kane," he said, allowing a note of condescension to creep into his voice. "I admire your courage, but you must realize this is suicide. You have 12 ships. We have 3,000. Kane's expression didn't change. "Commander, you're making the same mistake that a lot of people have made throughout history. You're confusing quantity with quality." "Quality?" Vex Noller's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "Admiral, your ships are held together with metal bolts and chemical fuel. My flagship alone masses more than your entire fleet combined." "Mass isn't everything," Kane replied calmly. "Sometimes it's about hitting the right target at the right time." Something in her tone made Vex Noller pause. There was no fear there, no desperate bravado, just quiet confidence, as if she knew something he didn't. "Sir," Quell Vastor whispered urgently, "our scouts are reporting something unusual about the human formation." "What kind of unusual?" "They're not arranged for defense, sir. This looks more like an attack formation." Vex Noller stared at the tactical display. The young lieutenant was right. The human ships were positioned not to protect each other, but to maximize their offensive potential, which was absurd, because they had nothing to be offensive with. "Admiral Kane," Vex Noller said, returning his attention to the view screen, "this is your last chance to surrender. Stand down your vessels and prepare to be boarded." Kane smiled, and for the first time since this conversation began, Vex Noller felt a small chill run down his spine. "Commander," she said, "you wanted to see what humans do when we're threatened. Well, you're about to get a demonstration." The transmission ended abruptly. "Sir!" Morketh called out, her voice suddenly tense. "The human ships are moving. They're accelerating directly toward our fleet." Vex Noller watched the tactical display in disbelief. The 12 human vessels were indeed accelerating, their formation tightening as they approached the outer perimeter of the Kitharan fleet. "This is insane," he muttered. "They're committing suicide." "Sir," Kelthorn said, his voice carefully controlled, "their acceleration curve, island. Unusual." "Unusual how?" "They're moving faster than our projections suggested possible for chemical propulsion." Vex Noller frowned at the display. The human ships were indeed moving quickly, but it hardly mattered. "All ships, prepare to fire on my command. Let's end this farce." The massive Kitharan fleet began to reorient itself, thousands of weapon systems swiveling to target the approaching human vessels. It was like watching a dragon prepare to swat a fly. "Sir," Yxlander said, her voice tight with confusion, "we're detecting energy spikes from the human vessels." "What kind of energy spikes?" I don't know, sir. The readings don't match any known propulsion or weapons technology." Vex Noller's mandibles clicked in irritation. These humans were full of surprises today, none of them particularly impressive. All ships, fire at will. The space between the two fleets erupted in brilliant light, as hundreds of plasma cannons discharged simultaneously. The combined firepower of the Kitharan fleet could have cracked a moon in half. Against 12 small human ships, it should have been instant annihilation. Should have been. "Sir," Quelvaster's voice was barely a whisper. "The human ships, they're still there." Vex Noller stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Where he expected to see expanding clouds of debris, he saw 12 intact human vessels, still accelerating toward his fleet. "How is that possible?" he demanded. "Sir," Morketh called out, her scales now a shocked pale white, "the humans aren't where we fired." "What do you mean?" "I mean, they're not where our targeting computers said they were. They moved faster than our weapons could track." Vex Noller felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "That's impossible. No ship can accelerate that quickly without turning the crew into paste." "Sir," Yxlander said, her voice climbing toward panic, "the lead human vessel is hailing us. Put it through." Admiral Kane's face appeared on the screen again, and she was definitely smiling now. "Having trouble with your targeting, Commander? What kind of technology are you using?" Vex Noller demanded. "The kind we developed while you were sitting out here thinking we were primitive," Kane replied. "See? That's the thing about humans. We don't like being threatened. And when we don't like something, we get creative about fixing it." "Sir," Kelthorn called out, "the human fleet has reached our outer perimeter. They're moving between our ships." Vex Noller watched in horror as the 12 human vessels wove through his massive fleet like dancers performing an intricate ballet. They moved with impossible precision, their paths calculated to take them exactly where they wanted to go, while avoiding the increasingly frantic fire from Kitharan weapons. "All ships, close formation," he commanded. "Don't let them get between us." But it was too late. The human ships were already deep inside the Kitharan formation, and as Vex Noller watched, something extraordinary happened. The lead human vessel, Kane's ship, suddenly accelerated to what had to be a significant fraction of light speed. It slammed into the side of a Kitharan heavy cruiser with the force of a small asteroid, punching completely through the hull and emerging from the other side trailing debris and atmosphere. The cruiser exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up half the fleet. "How are they surviving that impact?" Morketh whispered. "Sir," Kelvastor's voice was shaking now, "we're reading massive energy discharges from inside the human vessels. It's like they're not using conventional inertial dampeners." Another human ship performed the same impossible maneuver, ramming through a Kitharan destroyer and continuing on to its next target. Then another, and another. Vex Noller's fleet, the pride of the Kitharan Empire, was being systematically dismantled by 12 ships that shouldn't have been able to scratch their paint. "Sir," Kane's voice came through the communications system again, "would you like to surrender now?" The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent, except for the sound of alarms and the increasingly frantic reports from other ships in the fleet. Vex Noller stared at the tactical display, watching his invincible armada being carved apart like a training exercise, and realized he'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. The humans weren't primitive. They'd just been letting everyone think they were. "Emergency retreat! All ships! Emergency retreat!" Vex Noller's voice cracked as he screamed the order into his communications array. Around him, the bridge crew scrambled at their stations, their earlier confidence replaced by raw terror. The tactical display told a story that defied everything the Kitharan Empire thought it knew about warfare. In less than 20 minutes, The humans had destroyed over 400 ships. 400 ships that had taken decades to build, crewed by thousands of experienced warriors, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. "Sir," Kelvaster reported, his voice barely steady, "we're receiving retreat confirmations from what's left of the fleet." What's left? The phrase hit Vex Noller like a physical blow. The mighty Kitharan armada, terror of 3 spiral arms, had been reduced to what's left by a dozen human vessels that shouldn't have been able to dent a cargo hauler. "Status report," he managed. "Sir, we've lost 37% of our fleet strength," Morketh said, her scales now a sickly gray color. "They're not pursuing. They're holding position at the engagement zone." Vex Noller stared at the view screen, watching the 12 human ships floating serenely among the wreckage of his forces. They looked completely undamaged, as if they'd just finished a routine patrol instead of the most devastating military action in recorded history. "Incoming transmission," Yexlander announced. "From the humans?" "No, sir. From High Command." The Imperial Council had been monitoring the engagement, expecting to witness a glorious victory. Instead, they'd watched their most experienced fleet commander get thoroughly humiliated by a species they'd dismissed as barely sentient. "Put it through," he said, straightening in his command chair and trying to salvage what remained of his dignity. The view screen flickered to life, showing the stern face of Supreme Admiral Kex Thorian, the most decorated military officer in Kitharan history. His 4 eyes burned with an intensity that could have melted hull plating. "Commander Vex Noller." Kex Thorian's voice was cold enough to freeze helium. "Explain to me how you managed to lose nearly half a battle fleet to 12 primitive vessels." "Sir, the humans aren't primitive," Vex Noller said quickly. "Their technology is far more advanced than our intelligence suggested. They're using some form of inertial negation that allows them to perform impossible maneuvers without killing their crews." "Inertial negation?" Kex Thorian's mandibles clicked dismissively. "That's theoretical physics, Commander. Pure speculation." "Sir, I watched them ram through heavy cruisers at near-light speed and emerge undamaged. They're moving faster than our targeting computers can track. This isn't speculation. It's observed reality." The Supreme Admiral's expression grew even more skeptical. "Are you seriously telling me that a species that was hitting each other with clubs 50 years ago has developed technology that surpasses our greatest scientific achievements?" Before Vex Noller could answer, Yexlander spoke up. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human fleet." "Put the humans on screen," Kex Thorian commanded. "I want to see these miracle workers for myself." The display split, showing both the Supreme Admiral and Admiral Kane simultaneously. Kane looked exactly as composed as she had during the battle, while Kex Thorian radiated the kind of controlled fury that preceded executions. "I am Supreme Admiral Kex Thorian of the Kitharan Imperial Fleet," he announced. "You will explain how you accomplished what just occurred." Kane smiled, that same unsettling smile she'd worn throughout the engagement. "Supreme Admiral, with respect, I don't think you're in a position to be making demands right now. Don't be ridiculous. One fleet engagement doesn't determine the outcome of a war. The Empire has thousands of ships across dozens of sectors." "Had," Kane corrected gently. "You had thousands of ships." A chill ran down Vex Noller's spine. "What do you mean?" Kane's image shifted slightly, and Vex Noller realized she was consulting some sort of tactical display off-screen. "Well, let's see. Your base at Kepler Station stopped responding about 15 minutes ago. The garrison at Wolf 359 went dark 12 minutes ago. Your supply depot at Proxima Centauri, that was 8 minutes ago." Kex Thorian's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible. Those bases are hundreds of light-years apart." "Distance isn't really a problem when you can fold space-time," Kane said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "See, Supreme Admiral? You made the same mistake your commander here made. You assumed that because we looked primitive, we actually were primitive. Sir, a new voice called out from somewhere off-screen on Kane's ship. Vega Base confirms successful mission completion. No survivors. Kane nodded acknowledgement, then returned her attention to the Kytheran officers. That's 17 of your major installations eliminated in the last 30 minutes. We should have the rest wrapped up within the hour. Vex Noller felt his world collapsing around him. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was the complete annihilation of Kytheran power in this region of space. How many ships do you have? Ships? Kane laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Oh, Commander, you're still thinking conventionally. We don't need ships. Not the way you understand them. The tactical display on Kane's side became visible, and what Vex Noller saw there made his legs weak. Hundreds of engagement markers scattered across dozens of star systems, each one representing a Kytheran installation under attack or already destroyed. The 12 vessels you fought were just our local response team, Kane continued. We've got similar units hitting every Kytheran position within 500 light-years of Earth, simultaneously. How? Kexthorian demanded. How is instantaneous deployment across such distances possible? Kane's expression grew thoughtful. You know, Supreme Admiral, your species has been conquering primitive worlds for so long. You forgot that evolution doesn't stop. Every species you've crushed over the centuries, every world you've enslaved, they all had something to offer. Knowledge, technology, perspectives you never bothered to understand. She leaned forward slightly. Humans didn't develop this technology alone. We learned from everyone you destroyed. The Veltari taught us about dimensional manipulation before you wiped them out. The Helix Federation shared their quantum research before you enslaved their homeworld. The Zephyrians showed us how to bend space-time before you turned their planet into a mining operation. Vex Noller felt a sick realization dawning. You've been in contact with our former enemies. Former enemies, current refugees, survivors hiding in the dark corners of space, Kane confirmed. Turns out, when you spend centuries terrorizing the galaxy, you make a lot of people very motivated to see you stopped. Sir, Kelthorn interrupted, we're receiving priority alerts from across the Empire. Multiple sectors reporting coordinated attacks on Imperial facilities. Kane smiled wider. The Andromedans were particularly helpful with stealth technology. Amazing what a species can accomplish when they're not constantly worried about Kytheran invasion fleets. Kexthorian's scales had gone completely white. This is impossible. The logistics alone are surprisingly manageable when you don't think in terms of traditional fleet movements, Kane said. Each of our response teams operates independently, with instant communication and deployment capabilities. We can coordinate simultaneous strikes across thousands of light-years as easily as you'd coordinate an attack on a single planet. Sir, Yexlander called out urgently. High Command is reporting attacks on the core worlds. Multiple Imperial centers under assault. The Supreme Admiral's composure finally cracked. The core worlds? How did you get past our defensive networks? Kane's expression grew cold. The same way you got past everyone else's defenses, Supreme Admiral. We came from directions you weren't watching, using methods you didn't expect. At times, you weren't prepared for. This is madness, Vex Noller whispered. You're talking about dismantling an empire that spans half the galaxy. Actually, Kane said, checking her display again, we're about 60% finished. Your military infrastructure is proving surprisingly fragile when attacked by forces it wasn't designed to counter. What do you want? Kexthorian asked, his voice hollow with defeat. Kane's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of steel. What we want is simple, Supreme Admiral. Complete withdrawal of all Kytheran forces from occupied territories, reparations to be paid to every species your empire has enslaved or destroyed, and a formal guarantee that the Kytheran Empire will never again engage in aggressive expansion. And if we refuse? Then in approximately 6 hours, there won't be a Kytheran empire left to refuse anything. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady stream of damage reports from across Imperial space. Vex Noller stared at the tactical display, watching centuries of Kytheran dominance crumble in real time. "How long?" he asked quietly. Kane looked puzzled. "How long what? How long have you been planning this?" Kane's expression softened slightly. "Commander, we weren't planning anything. We were just trying to survive. Your arrival at Earth was the trigger, but the capability has been building for decades. Every refugee ship that made it to human space, every survivor who shared their knowledge, every species that taught us something your empire tried to destroy." She paused, her gaze distant. "You see, that's the thing about humans. We adapt, we learn, and we really don't like bullies." "Sir," Quelvastor reported, "receiving surrender requests from Imperial commanders across 17 sectors." Kex Thorian closed his eyes. "Patch me through, to all Imperial forces." "Yes, sir." The Supreme Admiral straightened, somehow managing to maintain his dignity even in complete defeat. "This is Supreme Admiral Kex Thorian, to all Imperial forces. Effective immediately. All Kytheran. Military units will cease offensive operations and withdraw to designated safe zones. Commanders will await further orders regarding formal surrender terms." Kane nodded approvingly. "Ah, a wise decision, Supreme Admiral. We'll be transmitting coordinates for neutral meeting zones where we can discuss the details of transition." "Transition?" Vex Noller asked. "The galaxy is about to become a very different place, Commander," Kane explained. "For the first time in centuries, species will be free to develop without worrying about Imperial conquest. There will be challenges, certainly, but they'll be challenges of cooperation rather than domination." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Eternal Dominion in stunned silence. "Sir?" Morketh asked quietly. "What are your orders?" Vex Noller looked around at his crew. These officers who had served with distinction through dozens of campaigns, who had never known anything but Kytheran supremacy. Now they were all staring at him with the same question in their eyes. "What happened to our invincible empire?" "Set course for the designated safe zone," he said finally, "and send a message to all our remaining ships. The war is over." "Sir?" Quelvastor ventured. "How did we not see this coming?" Vex Noller considered the question as he watched the last few human ships on the tactical display. 12 vessels that had shattered an empire. "Because we stopped learning, Lieutenant. We got so comfortable being the strongest that we forgot other species might keep growing stronger." 3 months later, Vex Noller found himself sitting in a conference room on a space station orbiting the former Imperial capital. Across from him sat Admiral Kane, along with representatives from dozens of species that had once lived in fear of Kytheran might. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. Without the constant threat of Imperial expansion, former subject worlds had rapidly organized themselves into cooperative networks. Trade flourished, technology advanced, and for the first time in living memory, the galaxy was at peace. "The final reparation schedules have been approved," Kane announced, sliding a data pad across the table. "Your people will have full autonomy within designated sectors, with the understanding that any aggressive action will be met with immediate response." Vex Noller nodded, reviewing the terms. They were generous, considering what his empire had done. "I have to ask, Admiral, what happens now? What's humanity's role in all this?" Kane leaned back in her chair, looking tired but satisfied. "Honestly? We just want to be left alone to explore and learn. The coalition of free worlds can handle galactic governance. Humans prefer to push boundaries and see what's out there beyond the next star. And if another conquering empire emerges?" Kane's smile returned, though it was gentler now than the predatory expression she'd worn during the battle. "Then they'll learn the same lesson you did, Commander. The galaxy is full of species that look weak until you threaten something they care about. As Vex Noller left the station and headed back to what remained of Kytherin space, he reflected on the Empire's greatest mistake. They had been so focused on appearing strong that they'd forgotten the most important lesson in the universe. The truly dangerous opponents are the ones who don't look dangerous at all. Humanity had seemed primitive, divided, weak. Instead, they had proven to be the most formidable force the galaxy had ever seen, not because they were naturally superior, but because they refused to accept that superior force was the only path to security. The humans had been underestimated once. It would never happen again.